Disclaimer.
Great.
The information
Okay,
and
did you hear what I
education
just said,
material
as far as
contained
the
herein is
description?
meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Okay, yes, I did hear you, Alex, but I think there's a slight delay going back to you, or there's a buffering going on when you're projecting to us. But we can work through it because your words stop, but then you seem to continue right where you left off, even though there might be 1 or 2 seconds in between that time. So please take the screen and move forward on this sharing with us. Okay, we're seeing your screen, just waiting for it to be populated, and there it is.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that technical glitch, so I'll be mindful of it. And but it's kind of funny, isn't it? That one moment you're speaking at normal speed, and then the next moment it's very rapid. So, but apparently you're not missing anything. So this is good. Welcome everybody, and then thank you very much for bringing us to here, leading the pack, so to speak. And I want to welcome everybody here to the North American teachings on a beautiful Sunday afternoon. We are trying to teach for the mature students and the new students at the same time. And we've been trying to consolidate thousands of hours of teaching. And the reason we've been doing that is because it's well over 6,000 hours and well over 10 years. And so we've tried to really put it together, and that's what we've been trying to do here in the North American team for the last 4 years. And now this year we've been doing a review. And so as today, for instance, we're doing the basic inner space review, it's another almost 12 hours of teaching being distilled down to less than 2 hours. So we keep trying to do this in fairness to the newcomers, but please remember that everyone is going to be asking questions, and as an oath seeker, you're in a position to do that and answer those questions, and you want to be able to have it gracefully and calmly and try and explain something. And people are going to be asking the same question but in different ways, and so you have to be able to explain it in different ways. And so this is all part of the process. But I think the reason so many people have attended this meeting and made it so powerful, and why everybody's listening from many continents around the world, is because they're running into the same problems in their own community, and they're seeking answers, and they want to be able to be in a position to be able to talk in an intelligent way because the teaching doesn't stop. It keeps on going every Thursday. And this is part of the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science. So today we're reviewing the basic inner space, and my name is Alexander. It is October 22nd, 2023. This is the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. And we talk about the 93% of the population that is unaware, and even a percentage of those who are aware still have a strong hesitancy to move into the new technology, which has been put together in a series of 3 books. Emeritevically Keshe, book number 1, The Universal Order of Creation of Matter. And then there's book number 2, The Structure of the Light. And of course, book number 3, The Origin of the Universe. And of course, the obvious question anyone looks at this is say, well, why is book number 3 not book number 1? And this becomes a very important point here because we're trying to get on the plasma highway. And as I said earlier on, all energy levels are plasma, but one in particular is a physical state. And that physical state is the state that we're most familiar with. It is also the lowest energy state. And as such, it implies that we are inferior. But I maintain that this is a characteristic, and it's not a characteristic to imply a superiority. It is an additional feature. So it's like someone has a regular motor and someone has a turbocharged motor in their car. Someone has roll-up windows and someone has power windows. So these are all features. It's just that we have to understand that in our search for outer space, we have to understand our embodiment. And our embodiment is this little piece of pie in the sky. And this piece of pie in the sky is so tiny. And the reason it's so tiny is because we keep looking at the smallest scheme, our scheme in the greater vastness of the universe. And this is unfortunate. So we started on December the 16th of 2022 with the fulfillment of the prophecies and the beginning of many soul expeditions. And every month we've been progressing. And it's not to leave anyone behind. It's just that we have to move ahead. We have to keep going. And so coming up in the month of November is the beginning of the series transmutation process. So we talk about the transmutation of light. And the transmutation of light is very important because the speed of light is not only the physical limit of the speed of matter, but is also the limit in terms of our understanding and our knowledge. And so if we're going to do the transmutation of light, then we really have to break through that ceiling and break through that limitation. And it's not as painful as it sounds. In fact, it has to be a very welcome thing. We've all had experiences with the cup of life, and we need to keep teaching the cup of life because they sure demonstrate various important components. So they're reflective of our emotional strength, which comes from some nebulous point in our core space. And this core space is reflective of our inner space, and that's what we're talking about today. We have finished with the basic earth space and moved ahead into basic inner space. And the reason for that is because all the teachings up until now have been very, very much focusing on the physicality and keeping an eye open to the plasma reality. And we need to be able to understand the difference. And we need to understand the sequence. And in order to understand that, we have to understand why we've created boundaries. And so we're going to review that along with the magnetosphere, atmosphere, biosphere, comatose, and that nebulous space somewhere. So please fasten your seatbelt and please enjoy the trip, because we're searching for outer space, that little piece of the spinning pie in the sky. And most of us have settled for that little red dot in the bottom right-hand corner, which is a really, really tiny red dot in the scheme of things. So how do we progress from there? And where did that dot come from? Let's just start with that. And so in basic math, which is another physical thing, we have to understand surface to volume ratios and how they work. But the thing is that there is a relationship. And so pi is part of the equation. And the problem with pi is it's non-specific. In fact, it's kind of a fudge factor that we throw in. And since we're the ones who are throwing it in, we're not part of these two feeding dimensions. And when we have these two feeding dimensions, we end up with three feedback dimensions. And how is that possible? Because in math, you take two and you bring them together and you create a third. Well, the thing is, in the plasma science, you don't lose the first two. They remain. And they're continually changing and positioning. And so if the two feeding dimensions are maintaining and positioning, then the feedback dimension is also maintaining and positioning as such. And since we always throw in that little fudge factor as the observers, it means that we're none of those three dimensions. So we're in the fourth dimension. Well, if we were to say that the physicality is three dimensions, then there doesn't seem to be any room for us. And so this becomes a problem in the understanding. So where is this fourth dimension? So what we're having is a contention between near space versus far space. And we wonder, is there a guiding hand behind this? Are we the guiding hand? And so we realize then that we have physicality in three dimensions. And we have a plasma reality in three dimensions. And all of the energy states are a plasma reality, including the physical one. It's just the physical one has a specific attribute. It's physical. The other plasma dimensions have different energy strengths. And so they can vary. They can vary in strength. And what impact do they have? And so when we look at the mathematical situation and we say that one field plus another field equals a third field, but it's non-specific, then which field are we talking about? And where do we fit in? And we have so many choices, because when we're looking at the different launch points and landing points around the universe, then we obviously have to identify which field, which reference, and understand that regardless of whichever reference you pick, the relationship of the interdimension relationships remains the same. And so right then and there, we understand how that we can transcend the different dimensions. Because within each of these dimensions, we manifest. And so that is a skill that we have. And one of the skills that we have is to manifest in physicality, which is materialism. and it's the lowest energy state, but it's not an inferior energy state. It is our moral leader, because it is our leader. And to be a leader, you have to be a moral leader. And as I said, you know, we're all students and we're traveling through these uncharted skies. And students become teachers. And when teachers continue to teach, they also become students, because it's more than just what you hear, it's more than just what you see. We have to make default positioning choices, and we have to sort things out, and we have to get elevated. And the reason for it is because if we stay in this one dimension, it becomes a very rough road. And so to navigate on this road, we find that we actually have to tune into the energy of the universe and turn on that power and drop out of our resistance, not abdicate our responsibility, but understand that we are part of the beginning. And when in the beginning, if we look at our universe and we say, well, there were no planets and no atmosphere and no water, but we're all here and the sun is here. And so how did that all happen? And so when we look at the sequence, we see that the sun came before Mercury, and Mercury was one of those planets. And so all of this follows the rules of the creation of the universe. So how the universe is created from energy. It exists from energy. And energy is always in motion. And energy is always positive. So it's the motion that determines the charge. So energy is a charge in motion, and it tells you which way it's going. But when we look at the universal order of creation of matters as displayed in book number 1, we find 3 different energies coming together, if you will, 3 different dimensions, 3 different field strengths coming together into one. Well, if they come together, where did they come from? And now that they're here, where are they going? And if they're not going anywhere, can they be maintained? So let's answer some of these questions. They had to come from somewhere, and they have to go somewhere, because if they fail to do that, they cannot be maintained. So the maintenance of any of these amalgamations of field strengths is a manifestation. And so this manifestation has to take these things into account. So all things in combination. So not only in combination to maintain its creation of matter, but maintain its combination in terms of where it came from and where it's going. And so now we have to see that we can not only come and go from the same field strength, but we can actually come and go from different field strengths. And why is that so difficult to understand? If you live on the second floor of a 2-story house, then you know that you can climb up the stairs, and you know that you can climb down the stairs. And so this is reflective of the plasma interaction. We symbolize it with the infinity loop and say all things in combination. And we say the magnetical forces are pushing and the gravitational forces are pulling. And the balance of that to create this matter is a Maggrav condition. And that Maggrav condition is a balance of forces. But clearly, when you look at this picture, you find it's not equal. So how can you have unequal forces and maintain this balance? And that is because when you look at the Kesh model of nuclear decay of the neutron, you see how the evolution from the neutron to the atom, where you have the neutron as the initial fundamental plasma, and then the atom is a combination, there's that word again, electron-proton combination. But the mass of the electron and the proton combination is not equal to the mass of the neutron. And so there's a decay process, and then in that decay process is the release of the PM ticks. And the problem with this model is, first of all, the word decay. Because what the decay does is it reflects a way to go down those stairs, actually go to a lower energy state. In language, when we say decay, it's a motion towards being rotten, as in a decay of moral character. But in nuclear science, decay only means a difference in energy state. Decay in nuclear science is the opposite of creation. So whether it's a creation or a decay, it's a creation of creation, or it's a creation of decay. So we find that the limitations of language also causes confusion. And so we have to understand when we're talking, are we trying to be language specific, or are we trying to be subject specific? So in this case, the decay process is subject specific to nuclear decay. And so that's part of the nuclear language. And so the review helps us because we can be more specific. We can be more specific in understanding. So after Mercury came other planets, and each of them came one by one. And so this relationship is very, very important because we have to understand that the manifestation of the next one is dependent on the precedence of the prior one. So at some point, there's a precedence of the first one, but then the next one becomes the second one, and the second one becomes the prior one to the third one. And so the process continues, and it keeps continuing until it stops. And so the question that we have to have is what begins the process and what ends the process. And in order to understand that, we have to understand what happens in between, step by step. So even to go from one process to the next process is a beginning and an end. So the sum of all the steps in between, which are a beginning and an end, are part of the overall process of a beginning and the end. And that's not double talk. What that is to remember the sequence. First came Mercury, then came Venus, then came Earth, and then came Mars. And if we were to say that, well, Mercury came because of the interaction of the sun with the universe, okay, I accept that. 1 and 1 is greater than 2 because we still have the sun, we still have the universe, and now we have Mercury. And so if we were to look at the relationship of the sun to Venus, we can't say it's the sun and the universe to Venus, because now Mercury is involved. So in effect, we would be correct to say it's the sun and the universe, but what we have to understand is that the universe that was relating to the sun in order to create Mercury, could not include Mercury at that point. It had to create Mercury. And so then to create Venus, it had to add Mercury to the balance of the universal equation. So we would be correct to say that the manifestation of Venus is the combination of the interaction of the fields of the sun and the fields of the universe, if we understand that the strength of the fields of the universe have changed because of the manifestation of Mercury. And so if we go to the next step, which is our home team, Earth, we have to understand that the interaction of the sun and the fields of the universe manifest the Earth, but the fields of the universe not only include Mercury, but now also include Venus. Now, if this didn't happen, then you could logically argue that the manifestation of Mercury and the manifestation of Venus should be absolutely identical. And therefore, then the manifestation of Earth should also be identical, but it's not. And then there's Mars, and then there's Tiamat, which was blasted to smithereens by some unseen forces and created the asteroid belt, and so on. We went throughout the whole planet. So what we have to understand is that when we look at this relationship of 1 and 1 is more than 2, we have to understand that the 1 and the 1 are not the same one. So is the location specific based exclusively on the physicality? Well, no, we've discussed that, because the physicality is a materialization on the lowest energy state. And we know it's physical because we can see it. But that is not the cause of that materialization. And that's why we're talking about inner space. What's the difference between Earth space and inner space? Because when we look at Earth space specifically, we see that on Earth space, we have other materializations on the materialization of Earth space. So we have minerals like copper, gold, and oil, and they're location specific. So they're location specific in their physicality, in their physical materialization, just like Earth space is location specific within the physicality based on the materialization positioning. So what is the cause of this? Because in general, there is a reality dimension that we can't see. I would call it outer space. And so clearly outer space is not a place. Outer space is a method of energy transfer. And energy transfer is represented by energy in motion. So this becomes very important, because when we're talking about this vanishing confirmation point, which is we think is the reality dimension, we call it the physical reality, but we find, oh, wait a second, we have one coordinate, the transmission, another coordinate, the transition, and then we have this point of existence, which is the transmutation. And at some point, we're going from this invisible point into this physical point. And somehow we cross over. And we can't see this. It's this crossover point that is the reality dimension. Because in order to cross over and to identify that point, we have to identify the launch point and the landing point so that we can have the coordinates for that point, which is generic some space. So whether it's your physical space, whether it's your mineral space, whether it's your earth space, planet space, sun space, whatever space it is. And since the physical reality is only one dimension, then that is bounced off by the plasmatic reality of two other dimensions. So the one plasma dimension plus the one plasma dimension is equal to the physical dimension if we're talking about materialization. But the soul is not limited. We could say one plasma dimension plus another plasma dimension is equal to another plasma dimension. And we would have to say not all plasma dimensions are the same. So in addition to this, then we have our space. And so we are in this earth space, but our point of view is from man space, our space. And we find that our plasma state is not only the soul of the man, but also the soul of the body. So there's two souls and in a plasma state. And so we have to take into account two physicalities. One, the physicality of our body, and two, the physicality of our environment. Because the physicality of our body cannot manifest nowhere. It always has to manifest somewhere. And so that somewhere also has to have manifest into the physicality. And so the crossover point is this point of emotion. But what we have to understand is that this conversion point is actually also done by inversion. So in other words, we can go from this point of transparency into this manifestation point, but now we understand that we can go from the manifestation point to the transparency point. These are all skills that we have to learn. And we have to understand that there's more to understand and awaken to it. So those of you who are participating in this review have had a chance to think about this and understand it a little bit more deeply. But now how do we convey that, to the rest of the population and do it in a very quick way? And so we have to define plasma and understand that physicality is one form of plasma. But plasma is a kind of energy state, and there are different kinds of energy states. So what we're trying to do is to find our inner space. And before we get to that, we have to understand our earth space. And that's why we focus so hard on getting that organized, so we understand the difference, with the earth space being that physical space and our inner space being that plasmatic space. And this becomes the key to the gateway to outer space. And that is the purpose really of our life. And that's pretty important. And so if that's not important, well, then nothing's important, right? So there are plasma rules, and they're different from what we have been accustomed to. So the energy states can increase or decrease by an order of magnitude. So, you're driving down the highway at 60 miles an hour, step on the gas, now you're doing 600 miles an hour. That would be cool. But the higher energy state feeds the lower energy state. That's the difference. And so the energy states changes manifest through, as we said, natural creation or natural decay, both of which are very natural. But there's another transfer state that is non-consuming. We call the catalytic energy transfer state. And the best example for that is our sun. It gives unconditionally. And at the rate that it does it is in a higher plasma state. And so that rate of change is also higher by many orders of magnitude. So more begets more. And so in order to create these fields, we have to create a fence or a barrier of fields. And then those fields have to absorb this energy. And so the plasma has these two characteristics where it can absorb fields and is a barrier of fields. But there are other rules that govern this, and it's bound to the ethos of the universe. And so we do have to take that into account, because that is the fundamentals of a relationship. Well, let's call it a successful relationship. So, you can't depend on undependables. And so when we look at the scientific responsibility, we're only looking at one side. And when we look at the spiritual community, we're looking at the other side. We have to put the two together. That's how we get a balanced maggraph. We have responsibilities that impact magnetically and gravitationally. And then when they work together, you create this maggraph condition. But if it's in balance, then nothing happens. So energy has to continually be in motion. Things have to continually change. But at what rate of change? Can we do this faster? Well, the plasma science is adding to this knowledge and elevating the rate of change. And we need to elevate the rate of change because we are having a failure in understanding our field relationships. We seem to focus on the spider versus the fly relationship, or shall we say adversarial versus coexistence. So we all know that we have this awake state, and we can relate that to, say, in plasma science, the nano state. That's part of our earth space. But when we go to sleep, we go into this dream state. And so it's non-tangible. We could relate that as the nano gap state between the nano and between, meaning inner space. And so we see that our understanding, this helps so that the science meets the soul of man for peace. Because you really can't go into a dream state if you're not at peace. You can't be tossing and turning when you go to sleep because you're not at peace. Once you achieve peace, then you fall asleep. And when you're in a peaceful state, then you have a restful sleep. So our soul limitations have to do with our lack of understanding the emotion of presence, because the emotion of presence seems to imply a connection between the emotion of the past and the emotion of the future, which is to say, I have to carry forward the emotion of the past into the future. Well, that is what anchors us to this presence, but it doesn't allow for any change. So the emotion of the past is part of the feeding process, and the emotion of presence is part of the feedback process. It is from there that we can carry on with the emotion of the future. And so that becomes the field of inertia. And in order to formulate that field, we have to have trust. The same trust that we had to have between the interaction between the force field of the sun and the force field of the earth that allowed the force field of the man space. And yet, each of us is different. Each of us is unique. And each of us are independent. We are independent. But we're independent variables of a dependency on this earth space. So we have to understand that our existence on the earth and how we move about is the transportation of our physical body. But how we move about through the universe involves the transformation of our souls. And this is how we break through the limitations. Those are all skills to learn. And so these skills, when we fail to learn them, then we create this cross and we amplify it by the double cross, and that becomes our eternal burden. And we have to carry that. And the reason we have to carry that is because when we lie, cheat, and steal, we are not only stealing that energy from the lowest energy field, but we're taking on that responsibility as well. That responsibility which is not ours. We've just taken that energy binding, feeding choice at the expense of others. So now that becomes our burden. And although it seems like we have more, we've gotten it from the lowest energy state. And the reason for that is because we've disconnected from our souls. So we are only focused on the soul of the body, which is part of our transportation system. And we're disconnected from the soul of the man, which is part of our transformation system. And so we can't get past that focal point, because that focal point goes from non-visible to visible, and from visible to non-visible. And we only believe what we see. And so if we were to understand that we have to keep the energy flowing, and yes, we have to be self-serving, that's a responsibility, but we can do that at the enhancement of others. And so that sounds like an additional expense, but it's not, because it's the fundamental part of energy in motion. It's all basic giving and taking, the negative and the positive. And so the relationship is the more we give, the more we have. And the energy can be flowing or binding. And so this becomes part of the principal interaction. And we say, well, the binding, this is how we maintain our Maggrav condition. But that Maggrav condition is dependent on energy coming and going. And so that Maggrav position has to take into consideration another Maggrav condition. And so that energy also has to be binding, but the energies between those two Maggrav conditions has to be flowing. And so which two is it? And so if we just focus on two, then what happens? Then the combination of those two manifests a third. That becomes your inertia field. And so when you look at the net result of the principal interaction of two Maggravs, what you get is a picture of one. And the thing is that picture is representative of the two that created it. And you don't lose those first two. So the first one and another one still remains. So those two are the feeding dimensions, and the third one becomes a feedback dimension. And as such, it converts the first two into also feeding dimensions. So what precipitated the initial principal interaction of the first two magravs still remains. But now we have a new dimension, a third dimension, and which is reflected of the energy binding of all three dimensions. And as you're sitting there looking at the screen, you understand that you're not part of those three dimensions. You are in another dimension. And so you're participating in these three dimensions, but you're free to go. You're free to come and you're free to go. And this is the key. So what does that mean? That means there's an energy sequencing, the same as there is a plasma field strength. Plasma is a kind of energy. So what are some of the kinds of energies? So we find that the soul of the man is the highest energy state. Then it's the soul of the body. Then you have your plasma energy, which is higher than your nuclear energy, stems from atomic energy, which is an amplified electromagnetic energy, which comes from electrical energy on the basis of magnetic energy. And each one of these is progressively lower as you come down, or progressively higher in field strength as you go up. And these are not the only energy states, but you can pick and choose which two you want to relate to. And if you want to understand the proof of concept, you have to understand that you had a preference and a sentimentality. And so you came from somewhere. That was your launch point. Where is that somewhere? That's your reference field. And you landed somewhere. That's another reference field. Excuse me. So wherever you launch from and wherever you land, that becomes your point of susceptibility. And where exactly is that? Well, in our case, we were born to Earth, and we were born using this system. And so we can rightfully say that the Earth trip is part of our round trip. So the trip is not really complete. Is it ever complete? So if we came to Earth, we had to create this boundary. So we have this sentimental pie in the sky we call Earth, and so this is where we are. Well, if that's where we are, how do we know that's where we are? Because we also have to figure out where we're not. And so we're not Venus and we're not Mars. So we're in between. So we create a boundary called Venus, and we create a boundary called Mars, and we create a boundary called Earth. And so the Earth is between these other two. And so each one has a boundary, and each one has a position. And so as we're looking at understanding that we're a space agency, and this is space science, we see that when we entered the space room, we were in the physicality. And whether we were coming or going, we had to cross over. And when we crossed over, we went into the plasma reality. And with that plasma reality, we were able to shall we say, alter the reality. And all those who participated were able to do this. And then all those who did this were able to come back. And they did this safely. And so we remember that this review is in the middle of 2022. And so what we're focusing on is this magnetical gravitational relationship. And we've seen that in the twin cups. And so one cup was the feeding cup and one cup was the feedback cup. But honestly, in turn, one feedback cup became the feeding cup and the other feeding cup became the feedback cup, because it's a two-way street. It has to be. So since this is a North American teaching, let's look at the North American boundaries that we have, right? This is our little piece of the pie on Earth space, even smaller pie, right? And so that involves primarily, when we say North America, this is Canada, US, and Mexico. And so where are we exactly? And how do we know where we're at? So yeah, we create the boundaries, but you see, whatever we are is a product of the neighboring pieces. So in order to understand our boundary, we have to understand that our boundary creates us. So we are not the boundary. So for instance, we're not Canada. We are created by the boundary with the United States. So our boundary of Canada is created by our boundary with the United States in the south. And then uniquely, we have a United States and Alaska, and so we're created on that boundary as well. So that's how Canada is created, by that boundary of its neighboring places. 1 and 1 is more than 2. Well, if that is true, then the USA is created the same way. So it's not the USA where the USA is created by its neighboring place, and the neighbor in the north is Canada, and a neighbor in the south is Mexico. So the USA is created by its neighbors. And Alaska is the same way, because it's created by the neighboring place. So of course, by extension, Mexico has the same answer. Mexico is not created without its neighbor. So the US is Mexico's neighbor, and Guatemala is Mexico's neighbor. So, and so it goes. So we're all the products of our neighboring pieces. So as a result, we create these laws, man-made laws, and they limit us. They put boundaries on it. And yet when we look at the universal community, it's unlimited. And so these create our boundaries, and it affects our safety. This angel refugium of safety in the universe is boundless. On Earth, it is limited. So when we look at the whole thing and we say that our Earth space here in North America is actually based on the neighboring pieces, obviously Earth itself has no boundaries. It's man who's created these boundaries. So we're not North America either, because our boundaries are the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. So without these boundaries, we're not anything. It's only when we create these boundaries, then we're something. And as soon as we're something, we are limited. So this limit is exemplified by the peace bridge. Because if we want to advance from our launch point to go to a new landing point, we have to cross over these boundaries. So wherever you are, that's not you. Only you is you. You are the connector. You're the transmutator. You are that manifestation point. And that manifestation point comes from the emotional energy. And so if that's the way that you are, then also that's the way that Earth is. So in other words, the Earth space has an inner space, and the man space has an inner space. So regardless of the manifestation of the Earth space or the man space, it is always a relationship that is manifest as a feedback. And that feedback always comes from another feedback. But not just one, it has to come from another one. So the one is not the same as the other. And the third is the sum of the two, but not only. It's a third, but you don't lose the first two. So one energy is your binding energy, and the other is your launching energy. You have to have it to give it. And you have to give it to keep it. This is how the emotional energy manifests itself. And so you become an independent, dependent on this greater oneness. So you have this feeding radiance and you have this feedback radiance. And so all of that is for the common good, isn't it? It's not just for your good, because you can't exist unless you're part of a nation or part of a planet or part of a race. And all of this is for world peace, because that's how it works. And we've been teaching this for 296 weeks in a row. And every Tuesday with the host, Rick Crammond. And so we find that the fundamental point that we are, each one, is the magnetical residue that's represented by the force fields of attraction and repulsion, which we call gravitational and magnetical field forces, represented by convergence and divergence of energies. So that each one of us is a variable, and each one is working in an interdependent universe, so we can all reach one and go through this emotional transformation to teach one about one nation, one planet, one universe, and how we can have peace and prosperity in our magnetosphere. So we carry on. So when we look at this product quality that we were talking about, so we have to understand the type of product and the kind of quality. So we have to make some nebulous references because we want to identify that it has to be somewhere, some time, some space, And so we have this nebulous positioning. So if we want to focus, we have to have a specific product quality with specific boundaries, right? So we're looking at Earth's target ranges, and Earth's target ranges are within the magnetosphere, which is between the boundaries of the moon space, magnetical boundary, and the core, which is the gravitational core of the Earth space. And so operating in this magnetosphere, we see that we're a product of the neighboring places, right? So we have no boundaries except to say that, you know, we're between here and there. And in this case, the two oceans. But on a personal note, we also identify ourselves by what we create. And we only look at the one feedback, because that feedback is not my garbage. The garbage is another feedback, but that's not mine. So my garbage is on the other side of the fence. That's how we operate. So we are operating, navigating between one pile of garbage and another pile of garbage, and continually looking for and getting rid of the garbage from wherever we are at. The problem is that your neighbor has a garbage problem, and you've created it. So your neighbor cannot just look at it from your point of view. They have to look at it from their point of view. And if you have given them your garbage and that's not their garbage, then they're going to give it back. And so you get your garbage back. There's something wrong with that sequence, because we have to figure out, how do we unlock the gateway to the inner space of our Earth body, right? Because if we keep throwing away our garbage and tossing it back and forth, we create an environment of war and poverty. When we look at unlocking the gateway to our inner space, we're looking at the peace and prosperity of the universal community. That's a much better picture, isn't it? Because not only is it an inner space of the Earth space, but it's also your inner space, the inner space of your physical body. So this is fundamental to the emotional energy manifestation, to take these things into account and work with them at the enhancement. That's what we're talking about, the enhancement. And we know that this is true because of what we've seen in the atmosphere. So we look at the Earth, and it has these two plasma fields where it has this north space and the south space, and they come together and they create this Earth space. And wherever we are, whether we're in the north or we're in the south, our feet are firmly planted on terra firma. And every time we look in the sky, we see the atmosphere. And what do we have in the atmosphere? We see clouds, we see rain, we see wind, and the effects therefrom. And then, of course, what's manifest from that is all the vertical people space, which we haven't talked about. They too have a point of view. They are living as a result of this atmosphere on Earth space. And within the people space, the vertical people space, we even have bumblebees, and they have their own space. And they're in this space. And sometimes they're in the Ontario Premier space. And then, of course, there's the Claudia and Josepha space. That's a really happy place. And so that's what we're trying to work out. We began the soul plasma flight simulation experiences to understand that there's a cancer awareness, that there's a soul space, and there's an addiction awareness. And this is how it begins, because this is part of our biosphere. Our biosphere is a result of all of this, what's going on in our atmosphere. And so we're still trying to transcend the limitations of nuclear science, because we have to involve the ethos of the universe. That goes beyond those limitations, because it involves morality, compassion, and courage. It's all part of creation. And remember, there's the creation of creation and the creation of decay. So the creation is in two directions: nuclear connection, where we're looking at man-made history, but then we understand that man-made history involves prehistory. How can you have a prehistory? History is history. But it seems to be that history preceded man. Okay, well, I get it. Yes. We have the Earth space history. But the Earth space history is showing a history as it relates to man before man got here. Something's not connecting here. So we are baffled by this illusion, all these things that glitter. We've learned about the business school of bankruptcy, the way they teach you about business, but that's not the way business operates. We identify garbage and we identify gold. Interestingly enough, we find that one man's garbage is another man's gold. And so what's the gateway into this gold mine? Is it the launch point, or is it the landing point? Or is it this nebulous reference field? Where is this reference? What does it look like? And so we created these concrete poles, and we found that there's a hole in the pole. And then we had these bamboo poles. Well, there's a hole in my plant. So clearly, whether it's man-made or vertical people-made, earth-made, there must be some kind of magrav feeding conversion going on in the hollow earth. And there's a relationship with the magnetical outer sphere and a gravitational inner sphere. Because we see these natural resources, which are all physical, specific locations. And the mining industry mines within the crust. So we have various digging and drilling methods. We have excavating, crushing, and smeltering, compressing, liquefying, refining. And what do we leave within the biosphere? We leave slag, tailings, and smoke. And yet we chose Earth space as opposed to Mars space. So clearly the physical space is not inner space. It's my orbit space, right? Because Venus moves, Mars moves on its boundary, Earth moves on its boundary, but each one stays within its own orbit. So it goes around and comes around. And those paths don't cross. They stay within their boundaries. So there's this in-between space relationship as well. And so we see that with the electrons, how they rotate around the protons. And so we see that their orbits and orbitals and how satellites follow these orbits. And as that's what we are we biosphere satellites? So are we on the moon? Are we from the sun? Are we from Mars? Or are we from Earth? Or did we come to Earth as a product of not being any of those others? So we define ourselves by defining our neighbors. And during a sunny day, we look up in the sky and it seems to be translucent. And so, is that our nebulous relationship with the sun? Now, wait a second. At night, the sky becomes transparent. It's the same sky. So, is that our relationship with the moon? Or which is it? What about the atmosphere? Is it our relationship with the clouds, the rain, and the wind? What about the window? It's made of silicon. The Earth's crust is made of silicon. But this window is amorphous and it's clear, and we can see right through it. It's transparent. So, is there a window to the universe? And can we see it? Well, we have to look at the manifestation, for instance, like this river in Europe that suddenly had all of these dead fish. It had to have the fish first before they died. So at some point in time, they were born. What happened? Was there an unseen hand? Or is this just a running joke? A running joke on humanity, which only brought to tears, not of joy, but just tears. And we talk about the green earth and what it means. And when we translate that into Ukrainian, and we see what green is. Maybe that sheds light on what we're looking at, because what we're looking at is not a reflection, but it's emission fields. So the blue jeans aren't blue, and the green jeans aren't green. It's a handy form of deception. And this is why we reviewed a song that was done around World War II. And you say, well, now you say you're lonely and you cry the whole night through. Well, you can cry me a river. Cry me a river. I cried a river over you. And now you say you're sorry for being so untrue. You drove me, nearly drove me out of my head, while you never shed a tear. Remember, I remember all that you said. You told me love was too plebeian. Told me you were through with me. And now you say you love me. Well, just to prove you do, come on. Cry me a river, cry me a river. I cried a river over you. Thanks, Julie. So our pursuit of happiness was actually a launch field failure, because man has never launched a rocket into outer space. We have to understand there's no economy without ecology. There's no place to throw the garbage. And you can be blind to it, or you can be comatose. So when we look at this nebulous relationship of what we are, and our target practice is coming to Earth, isn't it? But when? Is it in the summertime, or is it in the wintertime? I like spring. Some people like the fall. But so these are seasons, and funny things happen in these seasons. Bears, for instance, go into hibernation. The vertical people go into dormancy. Is the hibernation and dormancy a kind of suspended animation? Is that what we do when we go to sleep at night? Are we in a state of suspended animation every night? We don't call that hibernation, right? We just call that going to bed. But what happens when you go into a coma? That's an extended sleep. Is that hibernation? Or is that dormancy? Is that suspended animation? Except that you're not very animated. And so you have to wonder, where did everybody go? What's going on? So a few English words. Destrudo, the destructive impulse. It denotes an energy of death instinct. And the antonym of libido. Libido is the urge to create. Destrudo is the urge to destroy. And then there's mortido, the death instinct. This is used in psychology. It's the energy of the death instinct. Mortido can result in self-harm or suicide. self-harm or suicide that could put you into a near-death experience, or maybe you're a soldier of fortune and you're suffering from PTSD. You survive the trip, but then you exercise self-harm or contemplate suicide. So what are the comatose patients doing? I wonder. Are they deranged? Are they harming others? Or are they just dysfunctional? Or are they disconnected? So we ask, are they comatose or brain dead? Are they asleep? And so we have the vision feedback enhancement units, which facilitate the inner space emotion energy manifestation. They facilitate the plasmagen interaction. And so this was a gift to humanity, and the KAKT Foundation has offered this as a gift to the US military for PTSD recovery. And is it soul enhancement or is it spirit enhancement? Does it define the boundaries, or does it alter the feedback modification? Does it set the default pathway manifestation to that safety place, that refugium manifestation, and soothe the heart? This is the new plasma science, where it satisfies that hole in the soul, that hole in the soul of the family of humanity, which encircles the earth space. This is our inner space in that nebulous space. We have to understand this nebulous space, okay, because we have to understand some of these nebulous points. You know, when we look at these seasonal changes, does that matter? Because there's a birthday every day of the year, regardless of the season. And so when we look at this dimension building, it all starts with a point. Where is this point? It's just any point, some nebulous point. And you add one and you connect one. And then you add a third and you connect two. And then you add a fourth and you connect three. You add a fifth and connect four. Do you see the pattern? You add a sixth and you connect five. And you have all these dimensions, and you see that there's a growth. It all starts from some nebulous point. And so we see the relationship that we have all of these other nebulous things, such as the dynamic plasma and ganses and nano and environment. And the only one that is not nebulous is the earth, which is specific to earth. So all of these are nebulous points. And they reflect the same relationship in terms of energy state, the soul of the man, the soul of the body, the emotion, the physicality, and the environment, and the earth. So we find that the stronger the field, the higher the energy state. And yet, when we look at the universal order of creation of matters, that's the point. That somehow from that point, which is gravitational and is represented by the neutron at its core component, and through the KAKT model of nuclear decay, it creates this ray launch point. And then the residue is the atom, the proton-electron combination, which is basically dependent on the fundamental principles of the twinity, where the plasma of the electron is dictated by the transfer energy from the plasma of the proton. So when you look at this core component, we see the neutron is gravitational, but it's not the electron, because the neutron forms the electron-proton marriage. So it can't be just the electron. It has to be ray, or it has to be an atom. Okay, so this nebulous point has to be this magrav. And you add a second magrav and you connect. So we understand in physicality that we have waves. And as we try and make this connection, we find that as the energy comes in, it's strongest at that point, and then it gets weaker as it goes out. And in between each wave is a section, a start and a stop point. And then, of course, it's moving out. So it creates a larger wave. Even though the energy is getting weaker, the field is getting larger. And so this is how the plasma energy is in motion, is traversing this no man's land, this in between. And so if we understand what it means to be symmetric, then we can see that there's an opposite effect. And we say it's symmetrical from one side to the other. But if it's a reflection, if it's a symmetric reflection, then it's still opposite, except that it's converging at that focal point, at that point of reflection. But what happens if we change the energy state? What happens if we have a plasma state and a physical state point, and we add a second and connect? Well, that becomes an asymmetric relationship. One side becomes gravitational. One side becomes magnetical. But if you're just in the one energy state, in the plasma energy state, then the asymmetric relationship, it becomes directly gravitational and magnetical. It's still going from the weaker to the higher, except that now they're in the opposite curvature. And neither one of those is the origin, which is to say, if there's an asymmetric relationship of going from the neutron to the atom, and then you have the manifestation of the PM tick, you have to have it to give it. And then you can stay in the plasmatic state, or you can go into a higher plasmatic state and still maintain that asymmetric relationship. And so this is the emission of energy that comes from our inner space. It also is part of the absorption of energy to our inner space. And so the reference point is from our landing field, where we have a launch to the landing field, or a launch from the landing field. And the energy in motion are these PM ticks points. And this is all done at light speed. And so now we have to understand that the light speed, as we know it in physical terms, has a plasma relationship, and it still becomes an asymmetric relationship, because in order to come from one side to the other side, there has to be a motion from the gravitational to the magnetical. But in order to come from the higher energy down, there has to be another relationship, gravitational to magnetical. And so at the core is your crossover of these two asymmetric relationships. And that becomes part of your emission, the emission of the PM ticks release. So when we look at this plasmatic point of some nebulous point, we add a second and connect that. Then we have to ask ourselves, where is this other point? Because if we have an asymmetric PM ticks release, it has to go somewhere. So there has to be another somewhere. And within our sun space, there has to be an asymmetric reference point. And that reference point is between the sun and the earth. Are we talking about the physicality of the sun and the earth, or are we talking about the inner space of the sun and the earth? So that all depends on the energy state. So if we're saying that all of these energy states are in a plasmatic condition, except that the physical energy state is in a materialization energy state, that being the only difference, then the rules are the same. The asymmetric reference points are the same, where you have your Magritte condition of 1 and 1 and the creation of an inertia field, which is 3. And you don't lose the first one, and it's not the same as the second one, but you still have the second one, and it's still affecting the third one. And at that point, you have to understand that there's things in combination. So there has to be something else in combination. So there's another reference point. And that thing in combination is 1 plus another 1 plus an inertia field, which is the manifestation of the third field. And so the reference point has to be between these two fields and the reference point of the inertia field between the sun space and the earth space. So the inertia point of the manifestation of the inner space of the relationship to the sun space and the earth space, plus the inertia field of the relationship of the one field and the other field as a maggrav field, is equal to the feedback of the third field, which is the manifestation of one field plus another field, equal to the third inertia field. And you can take that construct anywhere. And the reason you can take that is because you're none of these fields. You're some gravitational field in some nebulous point, and you choose where you are. And right now, you have chosen to manifest in physicality, which we call the materialization of your man space within the earth space, which is part of the sun space. And this is all dictated by the inner space of every one of these fields. And so you find that each one of these fields has a soul. So now we understand how PM ticks work. They're part of the energy feeding packs, right? And they represent the dilution of composite plasma charges. That's what we've talked about, composite plasma charges. And there's a gradient charge of the atmosphere, where we go from the aminogen, which is the spice of life, where each of us is an independent variable, and we default to our position, to this humanity family, right here and now. And that's how we achieve our soul positioning. So when we compare the manifestation of the soul of man and the soul of the body, and how it compares to the manifestation of the sun and the earth, and we say, okay, well, we look at our head and it's much smaller than our body, but that's not quite right, because that represents our earthbound strength. Our earthbound strength is our physicality is strong and it embodies our soul. But when we look at the plasma field strength from the universal point of view, then we find the universal soul of man embodies the universal soul of the body, which embodies the physicality. Now that makes sense. When we look at our tiny perfect world and how it relates to our sister universe, and we look at our soul of the man and how it relates to the soul of the body, and we look at the soul of the sun and the soul of the earth, and we see those relationships, now things are aligned. Now things make sense. So where does our inner space soul position itself? Well, it is within this feeding dimension between the sun and the earth. And so the soul of the body is the manifestation between the brain and the body, because these are the physical manifestations, and they're fed by the emotion. The emotion and the gans have an affinity. They work together. They not only recognize lies, but they recognize love. So the Gans emotion is part of the two feeding dimensions. So it's the physicality of the brain and the physicality of the body that is feeding back, but not only. So is the soul of the body. So there's your three feedback dimensions. But the feeding dimensions haven't disappeared, haven't evaporated. All this is energy in motion reflecting the soul inner space positioning. And is always maintained by the feeding of the brain and the feeding of the body and the feedback of the brain and the feedback of the body to maintain the inner space positioning. And so our pursuit of happiness really has become the pursuit of problems, isn't it? Because we don't see the solutions. And so if we don't see the solutions, we don't see the evidence. So these are part of our earth space problems. It means it's an absence of inner space awareness. This contributes to our outer space problems because there's an absence of outer space as well. Because wherever this is some nebulous point. And that's the problem. You know, even the farmers have this problem with the plasma fields. So they raise cattle, but cattle have these gas leaks, non-visible. It's that fresh dairy air. And this is a problem. It causes defects on our Earth space radio channel. And these transmission defects affect us. So how do we fix that? So if we look at the basic cups of life and how we created the one cup, and then how we created the cups of man and how they represented our emotional and physical well-being, and then how it interacted with the earth space and the inertia of the environment. And then we find that all five cups, how they're working together, each one has a magnetical gravitational field and a soul, but collectively they have a magnetical gravitational field and a soul. And that's how we look at it. And so when we look at the earth space, that's how we have to look at it as well. The peace dome is the dynamic soul of the earth body. And at the core is the soul of the core of the earth. And everything in between is the inertia field, the inertia field of the inner space of the earth. And that's where we reside. That's our biosphere. That's our biosphere. The majority seek and will answer the call of freedom and emancipation because the universe is normal. The earth seeks freedom and emancipation, and man's existential crisis defaults to the harvest of this plasma energy of the plasma universe. The vertical people have no problem with this. They understand the dynamic plasma dimensions. So we have the feeding radiance of one maggrav crossing the reality dimension to the feedback radiance of another maggrav, which in turn then feeds the first. And that becomes the feedback. This is all part of the dynamic plasma interaction. And it transcends our aura. It's all part of the plasma feeding interaction. And so we can deliver the food security to all of us because we are all equal. So if we understand the soul of sequence now, it's the soul of the sun plus the soul of the earth that attracts the soul of the man. So now the soul of the man and the soul of the earth attracts the soul of the body. So the soul of the body and the soul of the earth manifest the physicality of the body. Oh, wait a second. So we have this dynamic transfer state and this physical destination state. And so our target practice brought us to earth. So the earth is part of our feeding and feedback system. So the earth had to be here first. So the soul of the earth has these relationships, right? So in outer space, the soul of the earth has to interact not only with the soul of the sun, but also the soul of the man. And so the inner space of the soul of the earth body has to interact with the inner space of our soul of the body. So the physicality of the earth body then can interact with the physicality of our body. So what does that mean? The soul sequencing of the soul of the earth is dependent on the interaction of the soul of the solar system plus the soul of the sun. Now that you've got the soul of the earth, it can interact with the soul of the sun and attract the soul of the earth body. And so the soul of the earth body interacts with the soul of the sun and manifests the physicality of the earth. And this has to happen before we can get here, because in order to get here, there has to be a here first. And so now we understand why it's important for this science to meet the soul of man for peace, because without peace, this can't happen. We are in the post-September 22nd of 2022 era of making choices. How do we transmute from outer space to this bountiful space of inner space on Earth? Because the inner space is that graceful space. And that soul harvest represents the body enhancement and the material enhancement. It's a two-way street. That's the emotion of presence. And this is how we can travel in our spaceships, whether they be in physicality or in the plasma reality. And we're not saying which dimension are we. We're just talking about the greater oneness that we've seen that transcends the limitations of nuclear science. And we've only been talking about that for 508 Thursdays in a row, known as the Knowledge Seekers Workshops. Helping people understand the difference between the matter plasma that you can touch and see and the matter plasma that you can't touch or cannot see, but you can sense it. And you can do this at different rates of sensitivity. So our job is to focus on the dynamic plasma, and all of us to enlist the services of the dynamic plasma so that we can move from the materialization science. And this is entering the new space age. And we thought this was great. We thought this was great when it went to Linz, but now we're leaving Linz. The Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science, welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers. Life's learning lessons transmute your preference and your sentimentality. There's a world peace treaty. It needs to be signed. Sign it with a pen, sign it with your heart, and sign it with your soul, because your soul represents a dilution of emotion that allows fields of life choices to be free from boundaries or abuse. Your ethos is your GPS position on the peace roadmap, and the universal community is your travel guide. The speed of love manifests and determines your inner space emotional constructs, and the earthbound soul family seeks physical and emotional gravitational vitality. The emotion of knowledge is embodied in the transmutation connection. This connection connects equally to the universal cosmic rays freedom broadcast. This channel of inner space, the nebulous inner space, resonates with the proper plasma universe. And so plasma science needs to continue to be delivered in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new outer space age. That's the end of this trip. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Earth to Alex. Come in. Well, that was a generous helping of teaching today, Alex. Plus, you were using big words like nebulous and asymmetrical. We're not all full English speakers here. You know, so I think the nebulous is just unclear, cloudy, something like that, vague, and
murky.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah, nebulous is not a word you hear that often, and as I said, many are not native-born English speakers. And the asymmetrical is just little difference on each side of a center line. Maybe that was
there. You go.
clearer.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had to refer to the dictionary to look those up.
Well, you understand it's a fundamental philosophy of military intelligence.
Sure. You said well, we're going to open it up here, but you said the GANs and emotions work together. Do they also play together, or would that be one and the same?
Well, you see why the review is so important, because way back 4 years ago, we were talking about GANs and its affinity, right? And so we said that the GANs is like a lie detector, and it's also a love detector.
Yes, it does have some intelligence, quite a bit of intelligence, as it knows how to balance most situations, taking from the body what it doesn't need and giving to the body what it does need.
And where is this GANs? This GANs we know is within our skin, right?
We're full of it.
Yeah, we're full of it, right? But, you know, we have this unique characteristic where we have the physicality on the outside, then the GANs is on the inside, and then within the GANs, we have the bone structure, which is physical.
Yes, and the marrow inside the bone is probably a type of GANs as well.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so clearly the physical makeup of the body, as you know, the medical community already knows, is that you have this physical plasma relationship within a physical plasma relationship, right? So you have the bone marrow and you have the skin GANs.
Yeah, I don't
So
think they
those are
know.
two.
I don't think the medical
No, but
community has a
no, they
clue.
know that. They know the bones are physical. You can see that with an X-ray.
Well, yeah,
Okay.
maybe with the bones, but the rest of it, and the interstitial tissue, and the idea of a GANS, and your kidney only appears at that shape because when you bring it out of the vacuum and so on.
Yeah, but you can't see that in your X-ray. You only see that when it develops a cancer. What you're basically seeing with an X-ray is you're seeing your skeleton. So what you're seeing is the physicality. So there's a physicality within the physicality. And so between those two physicalities is something. Okay, so whatever it is, and we're saying it's against, but you can call it whatever you want, it's between the two physicalities. And then within the physicality of the bone is something else. And they call it marrow, but you can call it whatever you want. You know, you can call it yummy space. So you can call it whatever you want. The key point is that it's not physical. It's something other than physical. And so we have this picture, and there's a physical bone structure within the physical body, and no one ever talks about that. Like it's, oh yeah, well, that's just normal, you know. So I guess if you open up a chocolate bar and there's no peanuts inside, I would say that's an anomaly. But if there were peanuts inside, well, that would be kind of like having a physicality within physicality. So no one's explaining, no one talks about that. Well, and that's the point. That's the whole point of this discussion. We're discussing about things that people just take for granted and that don't matter. But everything in the universe matters. This is the point. So everything about life teaches you about how life operates, and whether it's on a small scale or a large scale. So you don't have a microscope, you can't see what's going on inside an atom, and you don't have a telescope and you can't see what's going on in the universe. But you can go into your backyard and you can see what's going on with the vertical people. And it's all the same. There is a field and there's another field and then there's overlapping fields, but you don't go into your backyard and say, oh well some people do, and they say, oh well, there's the crabgrass or there's the dandelions, and someone says, well, I look at the beautiful flowers or look at the grass, and a landscaper, they don't look at the vegetation. They look at the substructure, the rocks, the landscaping. Then they look at those things. So everybody looks at what they want to look at. But the fact of the matter is, everybody is looking at the garden. And that garden is an amalgamation of all the fields and all the components that everybody individually is putting together. And so at the end, everybody's looking at the same thing, even though they specifically may be looking at one component of that. So, what is your point of view? So, are you an Earth space inhabitant? Are you part of human space? Or are you a geologist? So, as soon as you say that, you put a limitation on yourself. So, this becomes the goal. How do we take the limitations off? So we become universal functionaries and we become part of the whole process. So all of a sudden, we don't look at our tiny, rather imperfect world. We become part of the whole universal community. And what a beautiful picture that is, my opinion.
Yeah, well, that's what the processing is all about, layer by layer, adjustment by adjustment. I think you don't want to do the whole job all at once. I did miss a little bit of the teaching. I was trying to hear. I'm in the corner of the house where my neighbor, who every Sunday, he has this souped up Lexus that he can't get through emissions, but he likes to start it up and rev the engine. So he was doing that, and he turned the music up so loud, and I'm wondering, my windows are shaking, and then he starts using a leaf blower, and I'm thinking he had the music so loud so he could hear the music while he's doing the leaf blowing. So I had to use my field. At least he shut the leaf blower off at this point. Anyway, I thought that was
neighborly entertainment.
Yeah, he's got some kind of souped up Lexus that he can't get through emissions. but he likes to rub it up for about an hour.
Well, see,
Anyway,
the problem is he has to move to Tennessee.
yeah.
There, he doesn't have to worry about the emissions.
Oh, yeah. Right, right, right. Yeah, and we won't with the hovering car either, will we? Which is very nice. You know, I was thinking, or let's see if someone else would like to come in here, make a comment, take an exception, perhaps share some knowledge you'd like to share. Again, we're all sort of playing in the nursery school, so no matter how you couch it, if it's right for you, it's right. We're
I have
all
a question
level.
for Alex.
Yes, Randy, thank you.
He was talking about the sun today. And how many people have noticed that the sun is now white? It used to be yellow. So plasmatically, what is happening to the sun?
Oh, I don't know, Randy. What is your suggestion?
My suggestion is the magnetics and the plasmatic field of the sun is changing to adapt to the plasmatic energy of the universe that we're going through, since our whole entire galaxy is rotating in a new space.
Yeah, possibly. Or it's joining the White Club.
Driven by that guy in a Lexus.
So the problem when we're looking at the sun, of course, is that we're looking at the interaction of the rays from the sun interacting with the magnetosphere of the Earth.
Magnetosphere.
Oh, magnetosphere. Sorry. Yeah, had problems with these 9-cent words. Had to go
Yeah,
to
yeah,
10-cent
they are big
variety.
words. I agree. It's not something we talk about to our neighbors too much. Go ahead, Alex.
Well, your neighbor is emitting a magnetosphere that is annoying you.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah, we handled it. We used the fields.
yeah, that's right. So, but anyway, you know, the thing is that the change is constant, and so the change is affected by the contributing fields. And so what exactly are those contributing fields? So is the sun different, or is the Earth different? What do you think, Randy?
Both.
Yeah,
One
but
is an
also,
interaction from the other.
yeah, yeah. But also, you know, Mr. Kesh talked about the stars and the light we see on the surface of the stars, how, and it's just generated in a way in interaction with itself, so to speak, and maybe somewhat in the environment around the star. He covered a little bit of that in the workshop, or quite a bit of it. The light we see, you would think it would be the interaction, you know, with our fields as we know the sun, the light, and so on. But he was saying, how do the stars create that light when they're millions, billions of miles away? The light we see. And that is some sort of interaction on its surface, which is, again, a different aspect of understanding more.
So I'm really glad that you brought this subject up.
Randy.
So let's talk about Randy's answer. And so he said both, and that makes perfect sense. So if these fields are interacting, and if one field gets to be weaker, in order to maintain a balance, then it behooves the other field to get stronger. Randy, are you in agreement with that?
Yes.
Okay. Then the next question is the boundary of the field is at the point where there is no longer an interaction with another field. So the attraction forces be converted into repulsion forces. And if that becomes affected by the inner space, then doesn't it stand to reason that the surface would also change? This is to you, Mark.
Could you repeat that, please?
So if the
Yeah, I was
surface,
thinking when you get embarrassed, you may have a blushed face.
there you
let's
go,
say.
perfect,
Now,
beautiful example, great.
yeah, and I was also thinking, doesn't the sun have emotions, Randy, Alex? And could the sun change its color in a way based on certain emotions within that soul of that entity? Perhaps, of course, in interaction with its environment and everything else, but they all
Well, it
have
could,
emotion.
it could, except that we don't know the true color of the sun, because the color of the sun is not the only color that we see. We're seeing an interaction of the color of the sun with the interaction of the field of the earth.
Right, and we
We-
also
we're
know, yeah, the
we're
sun moves,
inside. We're
right,
inside the earth. We're part of the Gans of the earth. How do you like that?
right, and we also know the sun moves millions and millions of miles in each direction just to keep the balance of its creation or its solar system, let's say. So that could be another reason, in a way, for a slight change of its appearance.
Yeah. So why I wanted to bring this up, or I'm sorry, answer the question, is because that Thursday's teaching was specific about that. If the surface tension changes, and like you say, you know, if you're embarrassed or you're blushing, that changes the color of your skin. But I mean, if you are changing, so you're changing your emotion, or you're changing, well, in all cases, you'd be changing your emotion. But what I want to say is, let's say you're changing your physical positioning, or you're changing your intention or your interaction, then that is going to affect your surface.
Sure.
And the thing that Mr. Kesh was talking about on Thursday was specifically what it means to actually change your society, change your culture, change your drastic physical location on this planet. So, say a European going to China could very easily then transmute into a Chinaman, still being the same soul.
Did he say it was as easy as drinking a cup of tea or a glass of water?
Well, everything's easy when you know how to do it, right? But the point in terms of easiness is the the same as when you go to sleep at night. If you toss and turn, you can't go to sleep. So you have to be in a place of safety, and that place of safety automatically emits a a field of trust. So trust and safety go together, and at that point you have the inner peace, and so that could be reflected in your outer peace, and your outer peace allows you to go to sleep where you're not comatose, you're just in physically suspended animation, but your soul becomes a universe traveler.
Okay, calling
Yes.
all participants. Is there more, Alex? Let's see if we.
Well, I'm just saying that the question that Randy brought up beautifully ties in, with your description, Randy's point of view, and all of this beautifully ties everything in. And what I keep becoming, I'm going to say the word amazed, but it's actually just really pretty to watch. So I'm going through these reviews. So today's this basic review, and this subject that we're talking about, in effect, based on sequence, was determined long ago. So at some point within the last 4 years, okay? Some nebulous time between those 4 years. And so today's the day we made this discussion on this nebulous inner space. And yet it dovetails so very nicely with what Mr. Kesh was talking about on Thursday. I just get so fascinated with how that all works together. It's almost like, hand in glove. And
is there a synchronization happening? Are the souls synchronizing certain things?
The souls are synchronizing. Well, that's exactly the point. You see, this is such a good point, because it's the inner space which determines the physical space. Back to you.
So we want to open it up for anyone else who'd like to make a comment. Take exception. You can talk back to the teacher without getting in trouble here. There's no problem with that. Again, we all have a different understanding. We take from this knowledge what our intellect allows us to take from it. And no soul has a corner on intellect. So no one is above anyone else, and no one is below anyone else. This is a multi-grade class room or existence. So let's open it up again. It's up to you, of course. No one's being forced to ask anything or interact, and that's fine if you have a silent line of communication. Most of us are a bit unsure of all this, although we know it's correct and we know we're here for a reason. Our souls actually brought us here. Maybe our physicality is saying, oh, come on, let's move along here. But the soul is, the physicality is following the totality. Until they both get on the same page, I think, which is what we're trying to do, and what I think Mr. Kesh is doing with these systems, getting the physicality, the soul of physicality and the soul of the man to be equal, to recognize each other in a way as equals or the same. In balance, no one stealing from anyone else. And of course, the soul is the one we steal from the most, our closest friend. So it's up to each and every one of us to figure that out and figure out how to balance it out. But the systems are also helping. So back to the hovering car. And feel free to jump in if you're ready to jump in anytime. So that car, he said, once you levitate it, it becomes as light as a feather. So it must have some shielding, because, I mean, if he's talking about propelling it with a couple of hair dryers, I mean, theoretically, there's more to it, obviously. But what if you hit a crosswind? I would think this car is going to need some shielding. You're heading in a direction, and all of a sudden you hit a cross. Even with your regular cars on the road that are weighing tons, you hit a heavy wind, and it moves the car partially. You've got to kind of straighten it out. So,
well, there's a compromise.
Okay.
That compromise is to let's say reduce the weight of the car by 90%. So I believe that it requires about 250 pounds to have enough pressure to cause friction between the tires and the asphalt.
Right, but
navigate
he's saying
a
it'll be as
corner.
light as a feather, Alex. It doesn't matter whether you have a kilo in it or a ton in it. It'll still be as light as a feather.
Well, 250-pound feather.
Pushed by
You
hair
know,
dryers? I don't think so.
it won't be pushed by hair dryers. It's going to be pushed plasmatically. You are going to
Okay.
be the car sole.
Okay.
You know, that car is going to have to be navigated, and you're the navigator.
So now the same thing with ships, let's say. We put a ship on the ocean, it's above the water, obviously heavy winds and maybe some water waves, big waves pushing against it if you had to go through a storm. So I'm thinking there may be some shielding. But the beauty of the boat is it will never sink, as I see it at this point. You
Well,
cannot swamp it.
we have a problem here. So this problem is
You better call Houston if we have a problem.
they don't have the answer, trust me. But the point is this: we can enhance agriculture, but in reality, we don't physically need to eat the agriculture to get the energy. So having said that, the benefits that we can bestow to the agricultural business is kind of redundant. So to your question, if we have the car, why do we want the car? Because initially he said, you know, we've advanced past the car. We don't really need the car. Why would you have a car if you could transmute? Okay, because if I could come from, you know, say New York to Chicago and do that within, you know, a matter of seconds, and do that, you know, with a plasma unit, why would I want to get into a plasma car and actually have to, you know, drive from New York to Chicago like everybody else? Why would I want to do that? Well, this is the problem. You know, this is people still like the notion of having a vehicle. But when we get into shipping, I don't think we're going to be doing the same thing with the boats and the planes. I think we're going to be transmuting products.
Yeah, he mentioned that
the same way.
could, yeah, we could eliminate the total delivery systems. That's true, from point of manufacture to point of destination. But we may go through a transition period. Again, that
Well,
period
like I
could
say,
be,
with the agriculture,
yeah,
we're going to eat the food, right? We're going to produce the food and eat the food, even though, and if push comes to shove, and it may happen this week, where, you know, we're going to have to feed
yeah,
millions of people.
yeah,
We're not going to be going to, you know, the fast food joint. We're going to be feeding them plasmatically. So,
right.
you know, we can have both. So shall we say, entertain a dichotomy. So what I'm saying is, for the transportation, we can entertain this dichotomy as well, where we can transport goods, you know, on a grand scale, or we can still have the entertainment of traveling around in a vehicle. And you know,
It does sound like that. It does sound like
I'm
I
kind
mean,
of happy about that, you know,
I like
because
it. You don't fuel it for decades.
well, you know, I grew up with the Jetsons. You know, the cartoon, the Jetsons.
Yeah,
You
I've
know,
seen it.
younger people are probably, you know, wondering what are you talking about, but that's what they did. They flew around in these cars. But you know, when you look at the traffic jams on the road, that's a two-dimensional thing, right? It's along the surface of the road. If you were to have this traffic jam in three dimensions, my God, you know, it would be like a flock of birds overhead. I don't think that would be very attractive. Do you? I mean, when a flock of birds comes like through a migration, it's kind of interesting to see. They come, they squawk, they go. Okay, but if you were to have that every day, overhead, you'd have multiple layers of these cars flitting around. I'd rather have them
No
on the ground.
accidents, very uncommon. And I think he mentioned in the private archives, again, whether, as people start to take the motors and things out of their cars, some of them were going to actually, or take a ship, turn it upside down and make a crash. Some of these, he said, would get stuck in the atmosphere, maybe, who knows, a quarter mile up, and maybe they levitated, but they can't figure out how to get out with these cars. He said people are going to be working on this. And I know, he said earlier when he goes to Iran, that would be one of the first projects he got involved with the university people. But now, of course,
Oh, yeah,
it's,
yeah.
different, the playing field has changed. I think China's ready to go with this. They're not going to do too much with the electric cars, but again, maybe some of these things will just get phased in so that people can recoup their cost of investment into some of these battery plants and other things. But it does seem like, maybe there'll be showpieces for a while in a way.
Well,
Limited
how can that
production.
possibly happen? How can that possibly happen? That part cannot happen. You're either having a battery vehicle or you're a non-battery vehicle. Yeah, I can't see the
I
coexistence.
can't see
of
it
the two.
either, but you know how the man is.
Well, getting back to your guy that's stuck in the sky,
Yeah,
that would give a whole new meaning to Sunday Driver, wouldn't it?
yeah. Or, Alex, you could have lanes where one car hovers 5 centimeters off the ground, and then maybe, let's say, 9 meters above it, there's another lane. And then 9 meters above that, there's another lane. So you could have multiple lanes in a vertical sort of column. But I think they'll be doing just fine, probably along the route. There won't be any need for a repair or a ditch or, any sort of slide wood across the road. A large boulder falls from the side of the mountain and blocks the road. The car will just go around it or over it. So yeah, it's going to be so amazing that it's going to, again, melt.
Well, this would be a nice, movie instead of looking at some of those. So what do you call those characters? Superheroes. Look at Plasma World.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
there'll be all kinds of opportunities to promote and what's coming, and who knows?
Well,
exactly
what do
will
they
be.
do? They practice war games, in virtual reality. So, we can look at this plasma traffic control in virtual reality. The first thing that crosses my mind, and I mean that sincerely, is having these cars overhead. They would certainly cross my mind. I'm
But they
already
have a
annoyed with
soul. They won't hurt a
I'm
fly.
annoyed with the airplanes overhead.
Yeah, they won't hurt a fly. They won't hurt each other. Automotive repair will eventually phase out. Deaths on the highway. Millions of injuries in the United States from accidents. They don't die, but they certainly get their intestines repositioned or have a knee that doesn't function correctly anymore, or head injuries and so on. They're still alive, but they have to deal with that. Won't happen. That's going to be eliminated, as I see it, as we move forward into this position. So that's a lot of, as he said, many businesses will go bankrupt.
Well, you look at what's happening today in the semiconductor industry. I mean, take for instance Samsung. Their sales are down 90%.
Nokia is
And
laying off 14,000 people.
yeah, and these are high-priced people.
Mhm.
So but that's not because of innovation. That's because of suppression. You know, you either use it or you lose it. So you have advanced technology and you don't use it, well, you might as well not have it. It's just like money. If you put the money in the bank, you might as well not have it. Because it doesn't do you any good there. Money, like energy, needs to flow. It's a currency, and it needs to, it needs to do things. So
Circulate, yes.
it has to circulate. That's right. That's exactly right.
Okay, who else would like to share? I see Dean isn't here, and Gail usually has a number of follow-up questions. But they're obviously busy.
Oh, they'll sneak in. Everybody's getting busier and busier, and let's face it, this is a review. But the thing about it is all the members who are here are here, for a personal purpose. And I think a lot of us have taken on the fact that we have an additional responsibility. So I have to grapple with this question myself. Am I going to continue teaching? Or what are you going to do? Are you going to continue to be a host of this Sunday thing? What about Mr. Kesh? Is he going to keep on with the Thursday classes?
Okay.
What about Rick? He's already going into his what is it, second or third decade? Anyway, I'm being sarcastic, but the only person who's done more classes than Rick is actually Mr. Kesh. But maybe not now. Maybe Rick has surpassed him because he's done the other
no.
297.
We're all just doing a little part for a little while. That's all. That's all
Rick is the champion. Rick is the champion. He's and he's a model of Canadian pride. Okay, because he is determined, he's peaceful, he's genuine, and he's reliable. He's reliable. You know how important that is. And if you listen to the Belt and Road Initiative, the fundamental thing that resonates there, you can't depend on undependable people. When you shake hands and make a deal, you can't walk away there and have to count your fingers to see if you lost anything in that interaction.
Rick is like the Energizer Bunny. He just keeps going and going and going.
Yeah, but he's not he's not like a dog chasing his tail. He's on a mission.
He's very dedicated.
Well, he's a man of the universe. He wants to bring peace on this planet. Okay, and he's every Canadian needs to look up to him. I was just thinking, if I ran this country the way it's being run, my wife would divorce me. And wait a second, that's already happened. Never mind. Okay, back to you, Randy.
Okay. Any other thoughts? We're coming up to the top of the hour. I think it's almost midnight in Europe. Again, time changing here, November 5th. I think it is. So be aware of that. We'll come and.
You'll be here next week, Mark?
I will.
Okay, and then after that.
Yeah, the next 2 Sundays I probably.
Next 2 Sundays?
Yeah.
Okay.
Take a little
I will
yeah.
Get prepared.
Whatever you'd like. Again, we just continue to share and layer knowledge onto ourselves in a way to share more. That's all the process is at this point. But then again, there'll be a reason. This is a reason for all this happening. You're going to be sought after as gold dust, the knowledge seekers. And of course, the knowledge seekers, he's laying the road and paving the road, and we'll be filling it in with systems and other things. But he's just sort of laying the pavement down in a way.
Well, 3 weeks. Life is going to change. be a whole new meaning to 9/11.
Yeah, no, there's going to be all kinds of things going to have to be fit just the way the universe is with what the creator is doing in his remodeling process. So we don't really have the time and the knowledge to see it, but there's a whole remodeling process going on. And it takes time for things to move into the correct position. Maybe not so much time. Again, he wants it delivered sooner than later, but you have to work with the governments and see how they go. I think they'll all want it, especially once their nationals realize what's available to them. You mean I can feed without having to spend so much of my income on? I can have more time to explore the universe. I can be on vacation for 6 months, see the beauties of the creation. Why would I want to slave my life away on a monotonous, repetitive type of donkey work? So we'll see.
Sounds so good.
It is so good. The land of milk and honey is already here. All you have to do is listen. Okay. Anything else? I'm going to play the little clip that the Brazilian team made. And of course, you can join them in Daily Intentions every day at 2 a.m. CEST or on Wednesday, 6 p.m. for, again, the intentions of the elevation of the souls and the soul of the planet and so on. That's on Telegram. If someone's here, maybe they can put that in the chat. I shared the Universal Council. That's not in a Zoom or in a Telegram. That's just on the soul level that you can join at 9 p.m. But the Brazilians offer this every day, 2 a.m. for daily intentions. And then on Wednesday, it would be 6 p.m. CEST or CET time that you can join. Somebody is saying Jefferson said it'll change next Sunday. I thought in the United States it's going to be November 5th, but I could be wrong. It could have been a wrong thing or I misinterpreted. So we'll see. We'll check this week and try to let people know.
We'll see. And I want to thank everybody for allowing me to continue to present. And I hope you're enjoying these sessions. And I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you so much.
So I'm just going to play this short video and then the final disclaimer, but this was in 821 the Brazilian team made about nanomaterials and so on. And, you know, graphene, and we hear this is in the vaccines and nanomaterial. Your hair is a nanomaterial, and most people, except some women I know, usually want more hair. Everybody seems to want more hair on their head. Maybe not on other parts of their body specifically, but every hair has a reason. But that's a nanomaterial. That's like an antenna. It's absorbing and probably giving some energy into the body. So all these things, the graphene, the superconductors, nanomaterials, ganses, and all, this is all part of our structure. And we've sort of, in a way, you hear these terms, they're in a certain injections and other things, and, you know, ooh, it's nano, and we don't know much about that, but you're made up of these sort of things, much of you. So we shouldn't be afraid, especially your hair. It's a nanomaterial. It's an antenna. It's absorbing and giving off energies. And that's probably part of where we get 80% of the energy we absorb is from the skin, and you see the cross hatches and so on. So I'm going to play that 3-minute video, then the final disclaimer, and the meeting will come to an end. Any other thoughts, questions, observations, or anything else you'd like to bring? Well, they don't talk back to you, Alex, that's for sure. Everyone seems to be either mesmerized or so impressed or very satisfied with your teachings, which I am as well. So we thank you for being here and continuing to expand our horizons and our dimensions of understanding into this plasma science. Anyone else with anything else they'd like to share? Okay, I'm going to share the screen to start with.
Thanks, Mark.